Howdy, of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Jacob's Wife. So, this is kind of an interesting movie for me to kind of get into, just because really the same people that had worked on The Girl on the Third Floor also had done this movie. If a lot of people hadn't seen my review of Girl on the Third Floor, I was kind of won over by that film. Like, there was something interesting about it that I did enjoy. Um, so for me, how did I feel about this movie? Well, this movie it is a vampire movie. If people weren't aware of what is kind of going in this movie whatsoever, it is a vampire kind of movie. It kind of comes at you like if people are familiar with the show The Strained, it kind of feels similar to that. Plus, it also gives me vibes of another vampire movie called Let Me In, that has like a little kid who is uh, who is with a much older man, and come to find out that that old man was actually this girl's lover at the same age at some point, but this guy had gotten much older, and eventually is not actually her father, was actually just her lover at some point, but this girl never aged, so eventually this guy just kept getting older, and eventually, uh, I won't spoil for what happens for the rest of that film, but, like, this movie kind of gave me, like, the Let Me In kind of vibes, and I did kind of, like, there was something about it, there was, like, some parts where not everything won me over, but I just thought that this movie was just good enough. Like, really, there are times that I would also try to justify a movie to people because maybe a certain actor is probably within it. I don't know who that could actually be. Maybe because I might have been a wrestling fan at some point or another, or maybe I might have watched a movie that I did enjoy afterwards that maybe a certain kind of former wrestler might have been in, talking about that in a very cryptic like way, which I do apologize for. Uh, but yeah, like this movie kind of gave me like the Strain kind of vibes. I haven't fully fledgedly seen a boatload of The Strain, but like I have seen some episodes here or there of it, and that's what this kind of movie reminded me of. So if people like The Strained, they might like this movie. So really, it was kind of interesting going and like reminded afterwards of like checking out IMDb of some of these people that are actually in this movie. I'm like, the entire film, I was like, why is it that the main woman that is kind of focused in this film, why does she look so familiar to me? And Anne Feder, the girl that plays Anne in this movie, like I had seen her in this movie called Beyond the Gates, which is like a VHS kind of Jumanji-esque like movie, and I'd also seen her in like some other film that I can't remember what it was now. But anyways, so what is the story of this film? Well, this movie is to tie into a man that is to be a pastor, or this movie is to really focus on a preacher's wife. So, this preacher's wife is to eventually start to cheat around on her husband, and eventually that is to land her immediately into accidentally stumbling upon a person who is to be vampire. And then Anne is to eventually start to slowly but surely become a vampire, and eventually she is to eventually come to her husband with this and like tell him the whole entire truth. So all of a sudden this pastor is basically going to have to take care of his wife, and eventually that entails for him to just say like, well, like I think that I'm the perfect like Van Helsing like character to go up against to go up against a vampire because, of course, I'm a pastor and like I could create holy water at any moment, basically, because he can just bless any bit of water and it would turn into holy water. Plus, also, like, this guy can go and, uh, like, of course, like, have, like, crosses and stuff to ward off vampires at some point in this movie. So, a lot of people would immediately be interested in this film, maybe because of a certain star of some kind. Maybe somebody had checked out an IMDb thing and was kind of wondering when a certain Phil Brooks was going to be doing another film, and all of a sudden they would see, oh, he's doing Jacob's Wife. That looks intriguing. I want to check this out because immediately that's why I was interested in this movie because of CM Punk. Or I don't want to do the and or crap because there's people out there that hate that. So CM Punk in this film, Phil Brooks. Um, but yeah, like, really, like, I just wanted to go into this movie just because of Phil Brooks, and then I realized that, oh yeah, hey, great, like, also, like, the same people that did Girl on the Third Floor is doing this movie. That got me intrigued because I actually liked the visual representation, the visual things going on in that movie, and that got me intrigued to tie myself onto this film. Like, it felt like a winning combination. But this movie may not be something easily swayed by anybody, and like some people might just be like, you know what? Like, I was maybe thrilled with Girl on the Third Floor, but this one might be a hard sell for me, and I can understand that. Like, it is a vampire movie that I don't think quite gets into the whole vampire thing enough, but I do like the fact that this kind of reminds you of some horror films along the way, where it kind of gets to the point to where eventually when the pastor is having to talk to the police officers, and like it kind of feels like it has those same kind of familiar horror tones, where of course the police officers, of course, don't believe the pastor about the whole like situation that there could be vampires present in today's day, and just like, yeah, like that is not something that I'm gonna buy. But anyways, so a lot of people could be interested to know like how much CM Punk is actually in this film. Honestly, just very little. If anything, he kind of like shows up to kind of just make a cameo, and that is really towards the very tail end of this movie, I think, because really, like, he just wanted to continue doing a film with these same people, and like this is the role that he was given. And so, like, yeah, like, more than likely he probably was looking for just something a little bit shorter, maybe something with fewer lines, and so this was the role that he was given. um, I'm kind of interested to see like Phil eventually going into other projects. It seems that eventually he is going to supposedly be a part of, or maybe have a role in, the movie or the Stars show called Heels, and I guess that comes out in August. So timelining exactly when this thing is to come out. So I'm kind of interested in what the Stephen Amell, maybe quite possibly Phil Brooks show Heels is eventually going to bring into, whether Phil is just going to be in one episode or maybe he's just a background guy. I'm kind of curious to see what that's going to be. Um, so I'm kind of excited about that. But like, I don't want to get my hopes up to just be like, oh well, like Phil's gonna be in the show and he's gonna be in the entire thing and blah blah blah. Like, he might just be another cameo episode, and that'll be perfectly fine. Um, but yeah, it will be interesting to see like uh, where Phil continues to go with his career. But with that said, I think let's get into spoilers about this because I gabbed about this movie far too long. So this probably is not going to be in a huge amount of details about a litany of this movie, but I will try as much as possible to go into as much like details as I would like to go into, because like this movie may not be a winning combination for everyone, but that's perfectly okay. So at the end of the day, let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I get to spoil this movie. So really, this film is to uh, have a kind of a serum, or serum sounds like a wing joint, a sermon at the very beginning of this, showing that this is going to be like focusing on a pastor, or really much more so a pastor's wife. So so this is a showcase that eventually a pastor is to, of course, have a wife, and eventually this wife is to eventually go and sleep around, or technically like go on a almost date with someone of her past. So Anne is to go and have a date with a guy named Tom, and that is to lead them in a kind of creepy place that is to have all these crates that are to be present. So both Anne and Tom are to eventually decide to open these crates because they are to hear a sound coming from these crates. And we have Tom, who seems to eventually open one of these crates to be consumed by these rats of sorts. And Anne is to eventually go and get bitten to become a vampire. So Anne is to eventually come back home to her husband, and eventually, shortly thereafter that, there seems to be other vampires that are to start popping up. But anyways, we have Anne that is eventually trying to hide her adventure from her husband, and eventually Anne is going out to her window to have her master like go and try to use his and or her powers against Anne, trying to have Anne all of a sudden go out to this window and almost start to disrobe and like start to almost please herself against this window, to where the pastor is all of a sudden walking in on his wife doing this, like, Anne, what are you doing? And so all of a sudden Anne is to stop. So so we push on here. So eventually Anne is to start to like seem different than she is used to with the pastor, to the point of like the pastor going to some of his friends and is like, yeah, Anne is acting very differently than I would like, than I've like seen her. Anne tends to want to go out and starts to want to get certain kind of meals. Like she goes to the grocery store and basically just asks for blood, to where the butcher is like, so, what? Like, you just want blood? And Anne is like, yeah, like I'll have that. So so Anne is like asking for like rare steaks and stuff like that, so eventually she can just have like the blood of it. But pastors eventually eat his food, and then Anne is like disinterested in hers, but Anne is just watching as the pastor is to just eat his food, as basically Anne is kind of just tempted to eventually go and latch herself on to latch herself on to watching the pastor eat. So so the pastor is eventually just getting into arguments with his wife, which I guess would seem very rare. The pastor is to ask like Anne if she could make him like some kind of breakfast, and she doesn't. And so the pastor is like, well, I guess I'll just go and pick something up. But again, like the pastor is just kind of like, okay, this is like really weird. Like Anne is just like being a very different person than I'm used to seeing her be. So eventually Anne is to go to the dentist, and the dentist is like, what are you brushing your teeth with? Dirt? Like, this just looks all kinds of gross. And so eventually the dentist is to go on to eventually perform this procedure, I guess, to whiten Anne's teeth, and that is to have a UV light being put into it. So all of a sudden Anne's like face is just burning because of the UV light. Plus also like she is starting to burn because of the sunlight. So Anne is scrambling out of this dentist with her like face just burnt. And so Anne makes her way just completely out of this dentist, and I guess she's not going to be making another dentist appointment anytime soon. So, so pushing on here. So eventually there is a master that makes their way to Anne, and eventually also there seems to be another vampire who springs out to try and take either Anne out or anybody who is with Anne. And so that's when Anne has to actually tell the pastor the truth, that she is now a vampire, and that like she tells about the affair that she had and everything. So the pastor is to find out about this and also try and take down vampires that are coming for Anne. And so the pastor now has to make the consensus that he has to go and find the master vampire, so that way he can kill the master off, so Anne will turn back into a normal person, which I don't think that's actually ever going to really and truly happen, even if they do kill off the master. So, so going along, so the pastor is to go out and go and try to kill the master, and while the pastor is to try to do that, eventually there are vampires, of course, that get in the way, and so it seems like they're just going off onto a killing spree. And eventually there is the sheriff that is to eventually have dialogue with the pastor, just kind of mentioning that he's found things of the pastor at certain like crime locations. And the pastor's like, that's a coincidence. Like, if anything, like, yeah, I don't know what that means. So, so eventually we have seemingly Anne and the pastor's relationship like being like way better than I guess that it has ever been, to the point of them being in the throes of passion right on the floor. And like it seems that Anne is almost tempted to kill her own husband, but she loves him too much, to the point to where eventually towards the tail end of this movie, Anne has to now choose between the pastor or the master, while the police officers are picking up the pastor to make their way back to his home, because Anne is to be confronted by this master. And so, interestingly enough, that's when we have Phil Brooks appear here, and we have Phil Brooks that is trying to go and like shoot away, of course, the master, because of course, like a lot of police officers would tend to use bullets against, of course, any number of things to try to take it down. But yeah, like this is another situation where the police are kind of in a place where things are kind of unexplained, and so they kind of have to like just kind of like shove it under the rug and just like, yeah, like maybe this is just a domestic disturbance that like just was like went perfectly like okay, to the point of nobody needs to go to prison or file any reports or anything. So, but anyways, so the pastor is confronted with Anne, because the master is taking and slicing the throat of pastor to get Anne to want to suck the blood out of the pastor. But eventually when Anne is to jump on top of her pastor husband, she can't actually do it. She loves him too much, and so she won't actually kill him. But the pastor, like, the slice of his neck wasn't deep enough to where it actually was just an endless thing of blood. It was just kind of like a scratch mark. So Anne is to eventually just have to take out this master, because it's either one or the other. So eventually, with the help of the police, but eventually this master is to eventually get killed off. But even after that, or no, like I want to try to confirm in my mind that they had killed the master or not. Uh, but anyways, because I think more than likely, I think the master did get away, but like the master isn't going to get involved in Anne and the pastor's activities anymore. But anyways, so I'm trying to figure out the end of this movie. But yeah, so really, like a bulk of this is just like uh, them fighting off random vampires, killing them. But then eventually, when it comes down to the master, I think what ends up happening is that they didn't, like, they just had it to where Anne is not going to kill the master, and then the master just like is to be killed off, and then this movie is just to end with the pastor and Anne just going about their usual relationship, and the pastor figuring out how he can consistently have Anne be able to continue to live the life that she is living, uh, being a vampire. Because, yeah, so really it's just kind of a goofy film, and really I thought like something about it was intriguing, but maybe that might not be so for everyone. But yeah, like this feels like a quick thing to review because uh, there's content there, but it also gets to the point also where like this is a kind of goofy movie, but I don't know, there was something about it that I just enjoyed. Like there was something about it that I was like, I got something out of, so I guess another video out there. So I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.